All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm here to talk about how to do a research higher degree. I come from a bias of my research higher degree was a PhD, but I'm hoping that the lessons are applicable across the board. And I come from it from a clinical perspective. It was a clinical research degree. I did a clinical trial, and I am a clinician. I'm a general paediatrician. My PhD supervisor, Trevor Duke, trumped me literally 1 week ago by publishing this paper. It's worth pulling out and having a look at. He has some really good and very excellent advice within the paper. In particular, he talks a bit more about the actual how-to, things like how to do a systematic review and what should be the actual titles of your chapters, for example. Mine is going to be somewhat more philosophical. You all know that this conference is about stories. It's about science and stories, and I'm going to take you back in time. It's a long way back in time to when I was first got interested in research. So I was in my first year of advanced training to become a general paediatrician. And interestingly, and I probably shouldn't confess this given where my career path has taken me, but I chose general paediatrics for some, part of why I went into general paediatrics was so I didn't have to do a PhD. I had been very interested in a particular subspecialty, and I'd gone to speak to the head of that, and he had said, oh, well, of course you'll have to do a PhD, and I said, thanks very much, see you later. So in my first year of advanced trainee, I did not have a research interest. I had never published anything, not even a case report, and I was happily doing a job in the quality and safety department with Annie Molden, who's in the audience and who spoke yesterday, it was a non-clinical job looking at adverse events that happened around the hospital. And we had a cluster of patients who went to intensive care with seizures secondary to the intravenous fluid that they were given. And we got a bit worried about that and said, maybe we should be changing the fluid that we give to children. We formed a committee and we had lots of conversations, but there was no evidence to guide what we were doing. The research just simply wasn't there. So essentially, what did we do? We just kind of put everything on hold and thought about it, but really didn't do much. Fast forward to my final year of advanced training, and I was seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I had 1 year left. I was going to be a general paediatrician. My new husband and I were going to start a family. Everything was just about set, and I got a phone call from Trevor Duke, the author of the paper I put up earlier, who's an intensive care consultant and has a strong research record. And he said, are you still interested in finding out what fluid we should be using? And would you like to come and do a PhD and you could do a clinical trial? Which kind of threw me for six, because I was interested. I had no research experience, but I was really interested to answer this question. I was completely naive to what a research higher degree might involve, but I was very enthusiastic. But I didn't know how I was going to make it work. I wanted to do these three things, and I wanted to do them simultaneously. I desperately wanted to finish my training. I wanted to start a family, and I wanted to do research, and I could see simply no way of getting all three done. But after a lot of thoughts, I just went, well, why not? Let's just throw myself into this as I tend to do in life. So why do people do higher degrees? For some, it's to get a job. Some jobs around the place, they specifically look for higher degrees. For some, it's to build some research knowledge, an extra kind of string to your bow, is that the saying? Some extra information and to learn about doing research. For me, I was really genuinely interested in the topic and I wanted to know the answer to the question. But also, if I dig deep into my soul and think about what really drove me, I think, to be honest, I was partly flattered. I had someone I really respected saying to me, do you want to come and work with me? And I went, wow, what an opportunity. Yes, of course. And I realised that had never been the light at the end of the tunnel where everything was going to be better. I was actually on a roller coaster. And that light was the exhilaration and the fear and, it was all of the stuff that was still to come. So what's important about doing a research higher degree? They're going to kill me for putting this up, but these were my three supervisors. And when I say to people what's important and, people who are doing higher degrees, what messages would you pass on? Overwhelmingly, I hear this message, that the supervisor can make or break your experience. And people have gone so far as to say to me that supervisors trump topic, and that's debatable, but it's very important to have good supervisors. So go and chat to people who have, these people, that your potential supervisors have supervised before. See what they're like to work with. You will need to manage your supervisors. You'd like to think that your supervisors will always be there checking that you're okay, but you're adults and this is adult learning, and almost by definition, the people who are good supervisors are very busy people with a lot on their plates. So if you want to meet with them every second week, that is fine, and it's actually expected for many degrees, but you need to put that date in their diary and make sure that you have sent them the agenda and that you get out of those meetings what you want to get out of it. Hopefully your supervisor will help you and make that easier, but it's up to you. Also, I had 3 supervisors. What advice I got from Mike South, one of those supervisors, right at the very start was, if you're going to have 3 of us, you have to give each of us a role. And that was fantastic advice. So one of them was my supervisor who did the day-to-day, I've got a problem with this bit of paperwork, can I get a hand? One managed the clinical trial that we eventually did. And so if I had a problem with, blinding or with a protocol violation or whatever, I went to that person. And the final supervisor helped with my thesis. So if I had a problem with something in my thesis, I went to that person. Yes, they all helped with everything, but I knew that the buck stopped with one person for each component of my PhD, because otherwise you get 3 conflicting opinions and they're going to argue with each other, and then you have to pick sides on whose advice you take. So it's much better to have very clear roles right from the outset. So topic. I was very fortunate to have a topic that I genuinely wanted to do. Again, speaking to people going into the PhD, or going into this talk about what they thought about topics, some people said it's really important to do a project where you've got your funding all in place and you've got your ethics all in place and you can just walk in and do the higher degree. There is merit in that. It certainly makes life easier. It was not my experience whatsoever. I had no funding. I had no ethics approval because we didn't even have a project. So I did the project design and the protocol and everything right from scratch, which was hard, and it took a full year of my research higher degree to do. But for me, that was the most invaluable experience of the PhD. And now that I want to do further clinical trials, having had that experience at the research development was great for me. So there are pros and cons to both sides of that argument. Funding. Look, we could spend ages saying where to get funding from. Funding in PhDs and research high degrees is hard. The long and the short is get as much as you can. So scholarships don't pay well, but try and get one. Try and get funding for your project, because the more funding that you have, the less work you have to do. So I started off with no funding whatsoever and thought I would have to recruit every patient myself. In the end, I had an enormous, not that enormous, but I had some very excellent research assistants and a research coordinator helping and doing the majority of the recruitment, and that part still took 3 years, so I would have been absolutely lost without any funding. Quick anecdote, because funding doesn't always happen the way we want it to. My brother actually did a PhD with Trevor as well, same primary supervisor, which is bizarre. He had spent years in developing countries, in Timor and Solomon Islands and Sierra Leone, and came back, bought a house. I don't know how the bank gave him money, but bought, because he'd been volunteering for the majority of that, bought a house, his wife was pregnant, and he missed out on a PhD scholarship. So you could do what he did, which is go on a game show and win a considerable amount of money. For the rest of us, speak to your supervisors, look at NHMRC, local grant things. So get organised. I'm not going to tell you whose phone this screen grab was from. Might have been mine. It's suffice to say I am not an inbox zero person. It is not my strong suit. But when you're doing a PhD, whoa, what have I done there? I stole this off Google because I will never, ever be this organised. But when you're starting a higher degree, you have to get organised at the outset. You need to have folders on your computer. You need to have folders in your email so that you can always find things. And one really important thing, and where I wasted a bit of time at the start, the first months of your research higher degree will be reading literature, and you'll be reading really interesting papers, trying to learn all of the background to your topic, and you'll read and go, oh, this is so fascinating, I'm never going to forget where I read this from, shelve it away and grab another paper. Never, ever do that. Every single paper you read, you should write a sentence about and file it somewhere. You can use reference software or you can use an Excel spreadsheet. Whatever you use, don't lose that information. Or months later, you'll be saying, oh, where did they say that X, Y, or Z, and you'll be shuffling through papers and just rehandling work that you've already done. Do a timeline. This is a friend of mine's timeline that she has shared with me because she's going to submit in December. Share your timelines. They're called Gantt charts is the fancy name for these timelines. Right from the start, map out the timeline. This is very different to a clinical registrar job where you might, or any clinical job, where you might go to work, you see your patients, you have your tasks, you tick your box, you hand over and you walk out, and the next day you start again. This might go for 1, 2, 3 years. Mine went for 6 years. This might go for a very, very long period of time, and you need to map the whole process out. Share your timeline with your supervisors so they can hold you accountable. Of course, I had to then pop multiple babies along the way. All of my children were had during my PhD. So my other advice is triple all timelines. Everything in research takes longer than you think, not just having the babies and those sorts of things if that's what you're going to do. But ethics approval will take longer, getting money will take longer, recruitment will definitely take longer. Involve others. So this is obvious. Of course we collaborate, of course we network. My key message from this is involve others early. I thought I was doing everyone a favour by doing so much of the work myself. I didn't want to bother people. I was one of those people pleasers who wanted to take a big, beautiful, finished project with ethics approval and funding, and I did. I did all of that, and I took it to some people, and I said, I'd like to recruit in your department in 2 weeks' time. And I thought they would think I was fantastic, because look at all of this work I'd done, and I hadn't bothered them until the last bit. Turns out they weren't happy with that approach. So people like to be involved early. They like to have their say. They like to be a part of the journey. And yes, you can still do the majority of the work, but involve the right people early. Now again, my trivia brother sent me this slide. I said, I need a photo about collaboration. He goes, I've got the perfect one, and he sent me this. I said, that's perfect. I put it in. And then 5 minutes later, he sent me this one. All right. This next slide is a little bit more relevant to those who are doing clinical trials or trials when you're recruiting people. So we recruited 700 people across almost every clinical department of a large tertiary hospital. So we had to involve a lot of people. So how did we do it? I mean, I got advice to brand the study, so I got told, take the colour blue, and all of your paperwork should be blue, so every time anyone looks at this blue paperwork, they'll think of your study. And actually, I know that sounds quite silly and simple, but it was very, very helpful. We had visuals to keep people motivated. Their last 50 patients, the envelopes of presents for our research assistants as they recruited. But I was actually speaking to someone just last night who said that he recruited, he's in the room, Jono, that he recruited for our study. He's a paediatrician who was recruiting for our study, and he said, it was partly because you were really, really enthusiastic about it. It was partly because you gave us chocolate frogs. But a big part of it was that you convinced us that this was important, and that it was important for the patients of the future and the patients right in front of us. And ultimately, if you believe in your study and you can get that across to the people that you're working with, people will help you. Because a lot of people around here, as we can tell by the room, believe in research. So when you do a research higher degree, you've got to remember it's not just about that project. It's a wonderful opportunity to take a step off the roller coaster and to look at all of the other opportunities and learning opportunities that you can have. So I did a Microsoft Word course where who knew that it could do so much? I did a leadership course. I did a writing course, how to be a better writer. I did a personality kind of testing thing with my team, which I thought was going to be completely ridiculous, but it actually made me a much better leader, learning about how my personality influences how I interact and how to approach people who have different personality types to me. It's just an amazing opportunity when you're doing research to do stuff that's actually kind of cool, that's just for your learning. This slide's blank for a reason. Writing, I spent a lot of time looking at a blank screen. My message for writing, and we're going to hear about publishing later on today, my message for writing is just start early, do as much as you can. None of the writing that you do will be wasted. So whether it's for an ethics approval or a grant application, you'll probably end up cutting and pasting all of that in some way, shape or form into a thesis. So get writing early, publish early, because every time you send an article off for publication, even if it gets rejected, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 peer reviews and lots of critical appraisal on your writing that you can then slot into your thesis. So by the time your thesis examiners look at it, it's already been critiqued 3 times, which is fantastic. Just get words on paper, edit later. I hope that's not going to contradict what you're going to be told later. And presenting, take the opportunities to go places and present. I get really nervous about public speaking. I'm really nervous right now. But it's great. You get to network, you get to practice, you get to meet people, and it is another line on a CV, so it is good experience as well. This is about writing. Know your learning style. Halfway through my PhD, we moved from I had my own office, shared with some people, to an open plan office, and I am like a meerkat. Everybody who walks into the room, I'm like, oh, who is it? Who can I talk to? Who can distract me right now? So actually for about the last 6 months of my PhD, I got a babysitter and I went off to a library and just, sat in my local library working, getting a bit distracted by rhyme time, but not as distracted as I was at work. So know your style and know what's going to work for you. Research is a long journey and it's a hard road. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on me and my village, but you've got to look after yourself. Self-care is very important, and the word of advice I would have is outsource as much as you can afford, which is not much when you're doing a PhD, but just outsource as much as you can afford so that the time that you do have when you're not working is spent doing the stuff that you want to do. And finally, the last 6 months or year of your higher degree, start thinking about what you want to do beyond the higher degree. So research has a very, very long lead-in time. So if you are interested in continuing in research, have that conversation with your supervisors. Try and get all of your ducks in a row so that you're ready for the next stage of your journey. I don't think I did that bit well. I handed in my thesis with a 4-week-old baby, so I was very focused on other things beyond the PhD, but it is something that in hindsight, as I dip my toe back into research, I should probably set up a bit earlier on. So, finally, I just feel like, as I said, this photo is a bit of a metaphor. Kid underfoot, champagne in hand, trying to, big smile on my face. I feel like doing research has given me a completely different perspective on being a clinician. It's given me a skill set that I didn't have before. And I may not be as naive to the work that it involves, but I'm just as enthusiastic about research, and I hope all of you are too.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I honestly congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. I did 2 years of my PhD, and I was the woman who went running screaming out of the university and never came back. So well done for finishing. Let's have a look, first of all, and see what's happening on Twitter.
Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, at DocInSocks if you want to tweet any questions. So on Twitter, everyone is tweeting your pearls, essentially. So little snippets. I think I like... and other people on Twitter have liked just how you've set it out for us and the sort of tips that you've given, so it's really great. No specific questions, so we might need to ask the real world.
Do we have any questions? Great. I'm going to give you a microphone, though. Oh, you've got one? Great.
Sarah, did you work while you're doing did you do clinical work while you're doing your PhD?
I did a little bit. I did a couple of odd clinics filling in for people early on. So my 3-year PhD stretched over 6 years. So in the first year I had 3 months left. By the time I started, I had 3 months left of my training. So I worked about a day a week. They had pretty strict rules at my university about how much you were allowed to work. They've relaxed that a lot, but at that stage that was the maximum I could work. So I worked a day a week for the first year. For the second year, when we started the trial, I didn't work much at all, just the odd consultant outpatient clinic. I think I was a bit scared of becoming a consultant and hiding a little bit at that point too. And then I sort of continued on that for a bit. I did have my 3 boys during the PhD, so I took some time off for each and came back half-time, so it was a lovely flexible opportunity. And then in my last year of the PhD, I started doing inpatient locum shifts and actually got my permanent job as I was finishing the write-up. So there was a little bit, but not a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So my limited experience with funding is that sometimes it's time limited. They're like,
Yes.
here's money for 12 months.
Yes.
So how did you negotiate that with the time off and the half time?
Yes, it's a great question. I'm currently on a 12-month research scholarship. No, that's true. A lot of the funders are really flexible for maternity leave. It's changing, which is fantastic. I did do, that's basically the long and the short of it. Yeah, I got my main funding, I got some from Murdoch Children's Research Institute, then that was replaced by funding from the college, basically, from a scholarship through the college. And even though it took 6 years, I never did more than 3 years full-time equivalent, and it was a 3-year scholarship. So I just, if that makes sense, went to part-time and they let me do that. Yeah.
So does that mean in a sense you banked the money and then it wasn't touched for a bit and then you...
They dribbled it out to me and part-time and things like that.
Cool.
Yeah. There's a lot more flexibility, is my understanding, from a lot of the grants. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, please join me again thanking Sarah.